Jeremy Mack, Pro Cristo Rege, wishing you a happy Thanksgiving week this week. So I got my Jamestown mug. One of my favorite places to go in the world is like Williamsburg, Jamestown. Love to remember the founding era. So one of these days I'll get up to Plymouth. Really big fans of the Pilgrims. So one of these days I'll make a video, maybe later today, and I'll release it on Thanksgiving, talking about some things I think we owe the Pilgrims, but also talking about how I think we should follow their example. Well, speaking of following examples, I'll take a sip of my Java here. A very interesting story came out over the weekend. I'm going to make 2 points very briefly, and only two. So scientists mystified and wary as Africa avoids COVID disaster. A couple things from the story here. We're in Harare, Zimbabwe. COVID-19 is gone. This is sort of interviewing somebody at a marketplace here in Harare, Zimbabwe. COVID-19 is gone. When did you last hear of anyone who has died of COVID-19? The dude said, the mask is to protect my pocket, he said. The police demand bribes, so I lose money if I don't move around with a mask. Earlier this week, Zimbabwe recorded just 33 new COVID cases and 0 deaths, in line with a recent fall in the disease across the continent, where World Health Organization data show that infections have been dropping since July. So some of the things that are going to be said here, they're going to be, okay, why is Africa a place with very low vaccination rate? Here, it gives it to you. Fewer than 6% of people in Africa are vaccinated. So there's very low vaccination rate. There's very little public health infrastructure. So how has Africa done so well? Well, it's mysterious and puzzling to scientists. So they're going to give some reasons why they think that this is down here in the article. Before I give them to you, however, we'll see Devi Sridhar, chair of global public health at the University of Edinburgh, said African leaders haven't gotten the credit they deserve for acting quickly, citing Mali's decision to close its borders before COVID-19 even arrived. I think it's their different cultural approach in Africa, where these countries have approached COVID with a sense of humility because they've experienced things like Ebola, polio, and malaria, said Sridhar. Anyway, America has also experienced polio and malaria, just not in the very recent past, but both of those diseases were originally here in the United States. What I want to take issue with this section is Mali's decision to close its borders before COVID-19 even arrived is seen as, let's see here, operating with a sense of humility. But I seem to remember when America closed its borders, the AP and other legacy news organizations reported it as sort of a racist move. So if Africa does it, or if a nation in Africa does it, it's just the height of they're being the paragon of humility. But if America does it, they're being the paragon of racism. Look, this is the kind of thing that those who criticize the news can just pick out every day, all day long, the way that news is reported in the United States. The things that are said, the unfair coverage that's provided, the lens through which they slant all the news. And really, this racism lens is one that encompasses almost everything. Of course, they don't bring it up here. I'm just showing you how it was portrayed when America did it. So I just wanted to point out that even in an article where that appears to be breaking with the narrative, a year ago, this story would have never made it out there. The AP would have never printed it. The editors would never have let that headline run. So there's, kudos to the AP for, kind of starting to ask, some questions, running a story, even though I tend to view stories like this almost as planted stories. So they want to get ahead of the narrative. So they sort of plant a story like this out there. And then in here, they give some reasons why they think that Africa is not as affected as, say, Europe is. Let me run down through here and see if I can see if I can find where they had them. They are mostly, they look at age. So Africa was only about, the average age was about 20 years old, where the average age in Europe is about 43 years old, I think. Let me find it. It's right in here somewhere. I've already looked at it several times. The average age is about 20. They also cite that there's not as much urbanization in Africa. Here it is. Some researchers say the continent's younger population, the average age is 20 versus 43 in Western Europe. And in addition to their lower rates of urbanization. Now I'll give them the lower rate age, the lower age, median age. So that will play an important factor. But lower rates of urbanization, I'm not sure, because of the higher rates of sanitation in the United States and Western Europe and places like that elsewhere. It's not like in many villages you're walking around with temperature takers and sanitation stations and things like that. But just the regular presence of antibiotic soaps in bathrooms and kitchens across the United States and Western Europe. I mean, that just makes a huge difference. So urbanization, probably not. And then they spend more time outdoors. So younger spend more time outdoors. All right, we'll give them that. But there's a couple of other reasons they get into here. And that's where this lady here, Jane Aiken, gets involved. She's a senior research advisor at the Malaria Consortium and a co-author of the study, a study that they quote here. And what they're finding is that people who had pre-existence of malaria recovery, so they'd had malaria and recovered from it, they're finding that they have a lower rates of infection. So, and I'm going to say something, correlation is not necessarily causation. And that's something we have to get in our mind, because a lot of times we see things that correlate, but correlation and causation are not the same. Sometimes there are other underlying factors, and the first correlation is not the real correlation. The real correlation is the real causation is beneath the surface. So that's why you study things. You don't just say, oh, people with malaria then have less instances of COVID. So that's a correlation, but that doesn't get behind the mechanism of cause. So they don't talk about the mechanism of cause here. They're going to study malaria as a disease. And so, but there's a couple of things I would like to ask along with this lower rate of infection. First of all, with a low vaccination rate and very low public infrastructure, I would like to see antibody tests done across Africa to see if they actually have herd immunity through actual infection and antibody production, as we have faced every other disease in the history of the world, essentially, that could be faced that way. There are some diseases that cannot be faced that way, but that diseases that we could face that way, an upper respiratory infection like this one. So we've generally faced them and endured them and then developed herd immunity. And so glad we're able to develop vaccines and things like that now. But in regard to the current set of injectable therapies, there's just not enough long-term testing, in my opinion, to make a reasonable decision on whether or not they're safe or not. So that's my one point. Do they have herd immunity? And then secondly, has to do with this correlation with malaria. So one of the things that is also prevalent in Africa is the presence of antiparasitic medications. So antiparasitic medications often have found to have dual uses as antiviral medications, and have been shown pretty effectively in certain studies to be good prophylactics and early therapies. And the thing about these antiparasitic medications in Africa is that whereas here in the United States, you would have to go to your doctor and get a prescription, go to the pharmacist and have that filled. In most places in Africa, antivirals are available over the counter at very low cost, very low dosages, or low cost per dose. So you can walk in almost any pharmacy across Africa and buy, hydroxychloroquine. Starts at an I, ends with mectin. You can buy those antiparasitic medications. You don't have to go to your local Tractor Supply and get the horse paste. You can just buy the proper dose from the pharmacy. And so when I say correlation does not equal causation, there could be another causation in Africa that is keeping people from getting the disease in a deadly way, and also keeping people from getting the disease in an infectious way, because some of these antiparasitic showed dual use with virus use, and they have been effective in preventing people. So some of the early studies of these antiparasitics were giving people relatively low doses while they were already on ventilators in very bad condition. So, but when we started seeing studies from around the world on prophylactic and early use, that's when you start really seeing the use of certain medications sort of shine. They show up a little bit more on the radar. So if you read a study on some of these antiparasitics and you think, oh, it doesn't work, the CDC said it doesn't work, or the FDA said it doesn't work, there are studies that do show, even through them, that do show that the ones that are just majorly pointed to are, flawed, in operation, and not really what you're looking for. But Africa could be showing the way to not just a herd immunity route through getting the disease, but also through a prophylactic and a more normal treatment route, which is through antiparasitics. So you have low public health infrastructure, and you have low barrier to getting prescription drugs for antiparasitics. You have the presence of parasitic diseases, and so you put that sort of conglomeration together. It's not hard to see how they might have gotten a better result than we have. So with that in mind, I do encourage us to sort of look to Africa and ask a lot more questions, and not just read sort of an AP story like this. This is what I consider to be a relatively planted story with a very early explanation for these things, so, and right here, very early explanation for these things, to kind of set you off your guard and make you think, oh, well, that just makes sense according to, science. So I just yell that at everything. But I hope you can see the reasonableness of what I'm saying to you, that there are other things worth looking into. Antibodies, prophylactic use of antiparasitics, the presence of antiparasitic medications broadly, cheaply, and without prescription across Africa, as well as the presence of other diseases that might have helped build some types of immunity, like malaria. All of that has to be looked at, all of it. So with that in mind, I hope you have a wonderful, happy Thanksgiving, celebrating all that God has done. He's brought us again through this year, provided for us, given us all that we need for both life and faith. So stop with your family and give thanks. Don't use Thanksgiving as a speed bump on your way to the celebration of the incarnation, but actually stop and give thanks to God. This is a place where the civil government has declared a day of thanksgiving to the God of heaven. And we should, especially as Christians, be taking up the mantle of giving of thanks for our nation. So, signing off, Jeremy Mack with Pro Christo Rege. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.